of the bees that they're selling, they haven't really worked those bees and they haven't done the breeding. So how can they really speak to the quality of those bees? How can they really speak to how gentle those bees are or the productivity of the bees? So what you really want to do is get a hold of the producer, because they're going to have the most information about the queens that you're buying. And they're going to be able to tell you about the lineage, what kind of breeder stock they're using. And you're probably like, oh man, this is like really intimidating. Like I'm going to call this and say, hey, tell me about your stock. Well, the thing is that most producers really enjoy these types of conversations, and they're happy to enjoy, like, and share these details with you. They really get a kick out of it. They enjoy an educated mass. So you might end up like wanting to have like a 2-minute conversation, and they might drag you into like a 15 or 20 minutes. So just be prepared for that. And also, like, things to consider is, like, if you know where the queens are being produced, then you can look and see what the weather is there. So if it's like nonstop raining for 2 weeks and you're about to buy some queens from, that's subpar mating weather. Those queens probably aren't going to go out to get mate, or they're not going to get mated to the degree that they should. So maybe you want to consider, like, this isn't a good time to buy queens. So for instance, like, a lot of you are buying packages right now. And if you're buying packages for early season, that's not the best mating weather for Georgia and California at this time. So it might be better to hold off and wait a little bit longer till you get a better mating window. If you've only bought one queen from a person, it's kind of a biased opinion to say that these are the best queens. Really, if you want to form an opinion on somebody's queens, you need to buy multiple. So then you can find out, like, hey, maybe I just got that one really good one. Or if you bought just one queen and you didn't have a great experience, it also works in the inverse, where maybe that was just that one bad queen that the person had made. And then the last thing is, we're dealing with livestock. And remember that all sales are final here. So as soon as that producer hands you that queen, that's your responsibility at that point. So you can't do like takesy-backsies and say, hey, a month later, I got this queen, I don't want it anymore. Can I have my money back? I'm going to give it to you. They're going to tell you no. Another thing is to also know that if something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. So make sure you're paying special like detail to any like pictures or any like verbiage that they throw like on their website, or they may say to you. So like this is a really good example here. So the caption says 4-frame starter colony, pickup 2021. When I look at the picture to the left, there's 5 frames in this nuke. So there's something wrong, because that's a red flag to me to wonder, like, okay, do they just take this stock photo off of the internet from somewhere? Like, is this like immediately like it's a red flag if this is a reputable source or not? So make sure you're doing your due diligence with that. Now, cost and shipping, this is probably something that we're all familiar with after living in a year with COVID, is that we've had so many things shipped to our house, and we're so familiar with like buying an item that may be $5, but then having to pay $10 to ship it. So really consider that when you're buying queens, because most producers are going to want to overnight ship those to make sure that there's not additional stress or nothing happens to them in the mail, which is really responsible on their part. But the problem is that if you want to buy just one queen, a lot of the times the shipping may be just as much as her. So it's like you're buying, it's the price of 2 queens. So for instance, like in my example, like if you're buying a queen from Man Lake for $40 and it's $35 to ship her, you basically paid $75 for that queen. So if you're going to buy 4 more queens, you probably would have been better off with buying a breeder queen or using one of your overwintered queens and learning how to graft yourself. And really, if you're going to be into the bee game for the long term, you should reach a point where you're going to have a queen, a colony that fits all of your needs. It fits your management style. You just really like this colony, and you're going to want to produce more from that. So if you want better queens, learn the skills to make them. So learning how to graft, learning how to also set up a cell builder, and then you're going to also need the resources to be able to mate all those queens that you want to make, whether it's making 3 or making 300. And if this seems like way too much resources and way too much work, then what you should consider is supporting your local queen producers and buying their stock instead. So one of the things too is like Africanized regions. So this really nice map here, everything that basically looks like it's on fire, those are areas where Africanized honeybees is their habitat now. And if you're purchasing imported packages, imported queens from anywhere, more than likely it's coming from an Africanized region. And I'm not doing this to like warn you to scare you necessarily, but I just want you to be aware of like the region that these queens are coming from. I think a lot of suppliers do their best to drone flood their areas for this reason. And what I mean by drone flood is that they specifically have frames of drone brood to try and flood their mating apiaries, their mating yards out there, in hopes that they can outcompete the Africanized bees in that area. So it's still a roll of the dice to some degree. You might end up with a hot Africanized hybrid, or you might end up with a gentle one. Just remember that the term gentle is really loose, okay? Like everyone has a different scale of what gentle means. Gentle to me may mean something completely different to you. Personally, like to me, I haven't really ran into any super hot bees for a while. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but if like you're running into an issue where you're like, as soon as you get to your yard, you're running away kicking and screaming, it probably is not the most conducive bee for you. And that could be an Africanized bee. So if you source your queens from Africanized areas, perhaps it's something you don't want in your apiary. A big thing to consider is mating time. So that is how long it takes from when the producer puts the queen cell or virgin queen into the mating nuke and how many days after they pull that queen. So for instance, a typical producer could do anywhere from 14 to 21 days. And that makes a really big difference between 14 days and 21 days. When it's an older queen, so 21 days, you're gonna have less chances of supersedure, you're gonna have better acceptance, and the longevity of the queen is gonna be better. So she's gonna have a longer career at that point. This is why like making your own cells or purchasing cells or purchasing virgin queens is really the best option, because the queen's gonna have an uninterrupted career. And the other thing is, are the queens banked? So another tool in like the big box queen producers toolbox is banking queens. And if you're not familiar with that, queens being banked is when they take, could be 20, could be 120 cage queens, and they put them in a queenless colony, and they sit there for anywhere from like 5 days to 2 months. And the issues that we run into with that is that not only do the queens not really get the best care during that time, but they stop laying. There's a chance that their feet, also known as their tarsals, get chewed off. And basically, it's a really stressful period. So I'm not going to get too much into that. We can talk more about that when I present next month for you guys. Now, treatments. So if you're buying a queen from a producer, it says that they're treatment-free. You have to think, what does treatment-free mean to them? So does that mean that they're using less miticides or no miticides? And also, if I'm going treatment-free, I would want somebody to do the heavy lifting for me. And what I mean by that is like they've done the selection out of like hundreds of colonies. They've hopefully decided on like what's the best queen that they're going to use to breed from. And that's going to put you like heads and tails like above the rest of them. And just like a warning about when somebody says treatment-free, like I've seen advertisements online with folks saying like, don't manage your mites, manage your bees. Basically saying like these bees are so good that they're going to be able to manage the mites for you. You don't have to worry about it. Well, like, I've had conversations with those folks, and from their point of view is that in the commercial apiary, they had to treat 8 times a year, and now they only have to treat 5 times a year. And that's a win in their book. To me personally, I wouldn't consider that living up to the advertisement, but that's my opinion. Also, like if you're really interested, can the supplier provide like some overwintering success rates? So if they have really low overwintering success, but they're still treatment-free approach, does that really make these queens better? Or are they getting by just with sheer numbers? You know, if I have 1,000 colonies and I still have 200 that make it out of 1,000 that have enough to rebuild, does that really mean that I'm successful though? You'll have to judge that yourself. And then another thing is, are they sending their bees away during the winter and bringing them back? So if I live in Wisconsin, I'm sending my bees to California or Florida for the winter, and I'm telling you that I have really good overwintered success. Does that really mean that I have really good Wisconsin overwintered success? Or does that mean that my bees can just go to a warmer climate and enjoy that and just come back? So some things to think about is there's a strong link with populations of honeybees that survive without treatments. So these three things are closed populations, isolated mating, and colony density. So like if you have a closed population, you're not having really new diseases that are getting transmission between the bees because they're not allowing any other new colonies in. Other thing is like isolated mating. So that means like my queens, my drones. So they are in such a far off area that there's no other colonies in there that's going to disturb with their mating of their queens. And then the other thing is colony density. So the space between colonies and neighboring apiaries. So if you have a lot of space and there's not a lot of challenge to those bees, they can do a lot better. So the reason why I bring these three things up is because if you take bees from that population and you move them to a different part of the state or different part of the country where, you know, maybe the colony density is way larger, you know, or the population is getting mingled constantly by all different types of folks coming in to do pollination, your bees might not do as well in that type of habitat. And that kind of leads right into management style. So if I manage my bees completely different, but I'm successful from the way that you manage your bees, does that mean they're going to be as successful? Probably not. So you have to decide, like, if I'm going to run this type of queen, am I willing to adapt to their management style? Because you really can't expect the same results with different management styles. So I kind of have like a little tongue-in-cheek pictures up here for you of like three different like extreme types of styles, you could say. So in the bottom left corner, you have two folks that are just like completely covered in bees. They look like they're having the worst day at the apiary possible. I think one of them is literally frowning at this point to the camera. So that's like one type of style. That's the kind of bee they're used to working with. And you got the guy in the top left here. Looks like he's pretty relaxed. He's got a buttoned-up shirt on. He's got his veil, and he's got a handful of bees on a frame. He looks like he's having a pretty good time. And then you have the most extreme, this gentleman in the middle of the screen who seems to be wearing nothing but his veil and looking at a frame of bees. That's the type of bees he likes to keep because apparently they're not going to sting you. So just take this into consideration. Now, improved genetics, you may have heard some people mentioning this. A lot of times what they mean is varroa resistant bees. So the three most commonly used forms of like natural varroa resistance are VSH, mite biter, and hygienic behavior. And I'm going to briefly go through this for you in case you aren't familiar. So VSH stands for varroa sensitive hygiene. And what that is the nurse bees actually use their antenna to pick up a pheromone signature from the cap brood, the larva in the cap brood there. And what happens is the larva is sending a signal saying, hey, you know what, there's a mite biting me, I'm injured, come check this out. And the bee will actually chew the capping off, remove the larva or pupa, depending on what stage it is. And in that process, yes, the larva or pupa will die, but the varroa mite inside does not get a chance to reproduce. It may become phoretic on another bee, but it doesn't get a chance to produce. And it may go into another cell, and hopefully that's stopped again if it is trying to reproduce. But what's going to blow your mind even more is that these bees have adapted to the point where they can sense if the mite in there is reproductive or not. So if there's a non-reproductive mite underneath the cap brood, they're not going to open that and try to remove because they know that that mite can't reproduce. And really like the grandfather of like who discovered all of this is John Harbaugh. So in the middle of the slide, you see a picture of John and Carol Harbaugh. So John is a now retired USDA honeybee researcher who discovered this bees carry this trait. And I think it was about the mid 90s when he discovered this. And so basically for all this time, he's been working diligently to try and really breed bees that have a high level of this BSH trait and trying to bring that to market so that people become more aware of it. And then we have like the mite biter trait, and it's basically when a mite is phoretic. So what I mean by phoretic is that it's on the outside of a nurse bee at that point. These bees actually participate in grooming each other. And in that process of grooming, they remove the mites. Now, whether those mites hop onto another bee or that they fall to the bottom of the colony, hopefully never to be seen again, we don't really know. But the goal is that that mite hopefully either got injured and isn't going to be able to reproduce or live. And so you have a picture of Kirsten Given in the top right of your screen. So he's a researcher at Purdue University, and he's been working on this for about the past decade. Again, trying to bring this more into the mainstream. And then this brings us to hygienic behavior. And so when we think of good hygiene, it means that we're thinking like this person or this bee is very clean. And that's a very good way of describing it when you think about it, because hygienic behavior in bees is the removal of chalk brood or AFB or EFB larvae from the colony before any of these bacteria or fungus have a chance to really reproduce and become to a point where they're going to spread across the colony. So these bees really notice this kind of behavior or this kind of destruction happening in the colony immediately. And this has also been shown to help with mites as well, this hygienic behavior that they notice before the mite has a chance to reproduce, similar to VSH. So in the bottom right-hand screen, you have a picture of Marla Spivak. So she leads the research team at the University of Minnesota at their bee lab, and she's been working on this since the early 90s. So one more thing to consider is apiary location. So if you look at the two pictures, we're intimately familiar with this beautiful snowy landscape known as Wisconsin. And if we're experiencing this down south, maybe experiencing this, like this picture below here with beautiful green grass, a beautiful day for a stroll on your bike. So really think about how these seasons can really affect how the bees react to that. So that means like if they're used to just 365 days of beautiful weather, they're just going to keep rearing brood, and that's their style, you know. And that could really have issues with us in the northern climate with winter survival, like depending on what kind of like overwintering configuration you're using with mite levels due to if your bees keep brooding all through the season, the mites keep going up as well. And then also if they're going to be rearing all that brood, they're going to need something to eat. So these colonies could starve out. And just like as an example for you, if the producer of queens that you're buying from participates like heavily in almond pollination, you have to think that they're making a bee that they want to never stop producing brood and brings in a large crop, but also requires a large amount of feed in the winter to keep alive, and multiple mite treatments to survive to kill all those mites there from all that brood that they're producing. Again, like if this is your management style and this is what you like, then that all plays a role when you're picking a queen. And then I really wanted to add this just as a heads up to you guys. When you're handling cage queens and you receive them, whether it's in the mail or handoff in the field, make sure that you're feeding these cage queens. So upon receiving your queen, you just need to take a little dot of like a little droplet of water on the tip of your finger, and just touch that droplet to the screen on the cage. You don't want to touch your finger to it, because if you put your finger on there and you start rubbing, you could injure an antenna, you could scrape a tarsal off of your queen by accident. So you just want to make sure that they have water, they have a little drop of honey, and that'll get them through until they make it to your hive. And so part of that is that we keep them in a nice, cool, dark area, well fed, until it's time to put them in the colony. Now, one thing that a lot of us learned the hard way last year with COVID was don't handle queens once you've applied hand sanitizer. Okay, so some of the things that like I heard from customers and from other producers was, you know, they got their queen, they're trying to have good hygiene at this point, you know, so that we can stop the spread of the coronavirus. So they go in their car, they put the hand sanitizer on, rub their hands together, pull the queen out of their pocket, you know, to put her in a shady spot in the car. And by the time they get home, they realize that all the bees inside there are dead. So the evaporation of the alcohol in there seems to have either like stressed the bees out or just killed them completely. Also, be mindful of handling pesticides before and setting your queens down on sprayed foliage. So what that means is that if you're keeping bees in your yard and you just had your yard sprayed, make sure you're not putting that cage queen down in the grass. Or if you're keeping bees on someone's farm and you're not really sure what they do when you're not there, it might be good just for them to give you a heads up to say, hey, you know, we just sprayed for crown veg this week and it hasn't rained. So if you put your queen down, she might be dead. And if it seems I'm being a little over dramatic about this, I can tell you from some customers' experience that they've had this, and there's nothing more like heartbreaking than to hear somebody who just bought a queen a half hour ago has already killed them. So just really be mindful of that. And then don't limit your thoughts to just mated queens. So there's other options out there. You can buy queen cells, you can buy virgin queens. And then time for some shameless advertising here, and not just for myself, but for other folks. Like, make sure that you reserve your 2021 queens now. So for me, like, I'm taking orders for cells and virgin queens that will be able to be picked up in May, and mated queens available at the beginning of June. And like, for myself, like, it's really your schedule starts to get constricted very quickly, and the sooner you can get your order in, the better. Like, just for example, like I got 70 orders over the last weekend, which really filled up like a good portion of part of my schedule. But like, also talking to other producers down south, they're already filled their schedule up until mid-June. So if you're going to make splits this spring, you should probably hop on getting your queens reserved. And if you're going to make splits at the end of the season, really think about like getting that in the queue too. Because the sooner you do that, the easier it's going to be for yourself, the easier it's going to be for the producer to make things go right. So that's all I got for you guys. I'm going to open up to questions if you guys have any.
Maybe it did start at 6:30, Danny, because
Yeah, I didn't think of the time. I think they usually do start.
Betsy, your microphone is on.
sorry.
No, did you have as much issues as I had getting in? Yeah.
Gary
All
succeeded. Thanks, Trevor. That was great.